decay. Fourth, carbon, coal, oil drowning, frying, killing us. C3. Civilization has evolved during a period of remarkable climate stability. Remarkable stability. Remarkable. Huge. The new climate norm is change. Your children will never again have the planet that you had. But in 2012 you'll determine if this is hell or less than hell. Climate change is no longer something that may happen. It is happening now. Mountain glaciers are melting everywhere and at unimaginable speed. Melting ice sheets of Greenland and West Antarctica. Well, if we cannot cut carbon emissions quickly enough to save these, then sea level will rise 12 meters, 39 feet. And that's just the start. Over 600 million coastal dwellers will be forced to move. Do you figure that you'll offer your home? Who do you think will? What do you think will happen? Coal, oil are incinerating, drowning, tearing up our crops. Crop withering heat waves have lowered grain harvests in key food producing regions. In 2002, record high temperatures and drought reduced grain harvests in India, the United States, and Canada, dropping the world harvest 90 million tons, or 5% below consumption. The record-setting 2003 European heat wave contributed to a world harvest that again fell short of consumption by 90 million tons. Intense heat and drought in the US Corn Belt in 2005 contributed to a world grain shortfall of 34 million tons. Western use of coal and oil did this, not the developing countries, including China and India. US, UK, and Germany largely. You do take personal responsibility, right? Or is it really might makes right, as the Durban climate talks again indicate? Western, northern coal, and oil are incinerating our people. In 2003 across Europe, impossible heat waves from your coal and oil, largely, claimed more than 52,000 lives in 9 countries. Yes. Particularly if you are white and uneducated, you have an army of right-wing lunatics in denial you can join and hide with, or left-wing do-nothings you can talk this to death with. In Italy more than 18,000 people, 14,800 died in France. More than 18 times as many people died in Europe, and this heat wave has died during the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. But you are not a terrorist, right? Why? Are they less dead, or more dead, because of your cowardly denial? What you call terrorism is infinitely less deadly than your Western denial. Your Western coal and oil fueled storms are murder, and more. Carbon is fueling a drop in corporate and personal earnings that will never stop unless you stop carbon now in the 2012 election. It is causing a flurry of lowered credit ratings for insurance companies and stratospheric rise in premiums. Insurance companies are realizing that the past is no longer a reliable guide to the future, despite denial being our drug of choice. Your coal, oil are frying us. NASA data includes 800 climate monitoring stations since 1880. Since 1970, the Earth's average temperature has risen by 0.6 degrees Celsius, or 1 degree Fahrenheit, more than natural processes warmed the Earth in a million years, literally. Think about what just 1 degree has done to your kids' future. The 23 warmest years on record have come since 1980. The 7 warmest years since record keeping began in 1880 have come in the last 9 years. Yes, the deniers are dooming your kids' future. Yes, the lip service, risk nothing, cowards on the left and center are doing the greatest harm of all by doing not a fraction of what it will take to stop this. Heading toward infinitely too little, infinitely too late. Stop it. Your Western industrial revolution has all but doomed us now. It raised CO2 from 277 parts per million, ppm, to 384 ppm in 2007, in less than 100, and mostly in the last 30 years, with latent heating of the ocean, that will be continuing to manifest in further warming for decades. Now we are at an annual discharge into the atmosphere of, this is every year, year after year, of 7.5 billion tons of carbon from burning fossil fuels, and 1.5 billion tons from deforestation for your beef, pork and fuel for your cars. The current annual rise is nearly 4 times what it was in the 1950s. Ain't a floralism grand? And it is your kids that will get your hangover. How great is that? Note, this 7.5 and 1.5 billion tons of carbon becomes 3.67 times that, as the oxygen is combined, in burning 3.67 times. And it stays up for between 100 and 1000 years. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of scientists, many with unqualified, fossil fuel funded opinions. But 2,500 of the scientists around the world are devoted to climate science. They are of a consensus unprecedented in science. Huge warming soon is all but unstoppable. 2 to 11 degrees F this century is virtually certain, unless you stand and make November 2011 the mandate to stop it. The rise will be very uneven, much greater over land than over oceans. Much greater in the high northern latitudes than over the equator, think Greenland ice sheet, and the reflective polar caps. Higher over the continental interiors than in coastal regions. Higher temperatures exterminate humanity 5 ways. They diminish crop yields, melt the snow/ice reservoirs in the mountains that feed the Earth's rivers during the growing season. They cause more destructive storms. They increase the area affected by drought. They cause more frequent and destructive wildfires that are so hot they often incinerate the seeds, preventing regeneration. Ever. The world's drought area has more than doubled since 1970. National Center for Atmospheric Research reported that the area experiencing very dry conditions expanded from less than 15% of the Earth's total land area in the 1970s to roughly 30% by 2002. They attributed part of the change to a rise in temperature and part to reduced precipitation. Most of the drying was concentrated in Europe and Asia, Canada, Western and Southern Africa, and Eastern Australia. Your coal and your oil are expanding the deserts toward the poles, extincting 50 to 250 species per day in the process, and moving poleward the rest. Temperature increase destroys life support quickly. Even a 1.6 degrees Celsius rise in summer temperature could double the area of wildfires in the 11 western states. That's double. Double. Forever. The 2007 IPCC report notes that a rise in temperature of 1 degree Celsius will put up to 30% of all species at risk of extinction. You are on track for 1 degree every 10 to 20 years. Inuits have been surprised by the appearance of robins, a bird they have never seen before. Indeed, there is no word in Inuit for robin. If you let the temperature rise continue, then by 2040 1 out of 5 of the Pacific Northwest's rivers will be too hot for salmon, steelhead, and trout to survive. You love your kids, right? Right? Enough to fight? Heat terminates crop growth. Terminates. Got it? The climate system was changed little over farming's 11,000-year history. Even a relatively minor increase during the growing season of 1 or 2 degrees Celsius can shrink the grain harvest, reducing or even halting photosynthesis, preventing pollination, and leading to crop dehydration. The detrimental effect of higher temperatures on yields overrides the CO2 fertilization effect for the major crops. At 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, Photosynthesis ceases entirely. No worries, if you fail to stop it now, we won't hit 104 degrees until late century. Who will blame you? Relax. Heat dooms pollination. Got it? Of rice, wheat, and corn. Corn is particularly vulnerable to heat in the pollination process. Pollen must fall from the tassel to the strands of silk that emerge from the end of each ear of corn. Each of these silk strands is attached to a kernel site on the cob. Pollen must fall on the silk strand and then journey to the kernel site. When temperatures are uncommonly high, the silk strands quickly dry out and turn brown, unable to play their role in the fertilization process. No worries. There will be enough food for you. Crop yield plunges 10% for each 1 degree rise. Pollination of rice falls from 100% at 34 degrees Celsius to near zero at 40 degrees Celsius. Zero. Pretty scary, but most of you will be long gone by then. Each 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature above the norm lowers wheat, rice, and corn yields by 10%. Temperature increases due to global warming will make it increasingly difficult to feed Earth's growing population. Guess whether the one saying this is like you, overprivileged and therefore insulated. The world's irrigation in the sky is being decimated. Glaciers, snowpack, snow and ice masses in mountains are nature's freshwater reservoirs, nature's way of storing water to feed rivers during the dry season. Even a 1 degree rise in temperature in mountainous regions can markedly reduce the share of precipitation falling as snow and boost that coming down as rain. This increases flooding during the rainy season and reduces the snow melt that flows into rivers. In English this translates, your alcoholic binge on coal and oil is deadly. Glaciers that feed rivers in the dry season are vanishing. Some have disappeared entirely. India's Gangotri Glacier, which supplies 70% of the water to the Ganges, is not only melting, it is doing so at an accelerated rate. Gangotri's life expectancy will be measured in decades and the Ganges will become a seasonal river. For the 407 million Indians and Bangladeshis who live in the Ganges basin, this could, oh, how nicely put, be a life-threatening loss of water. China, then India are most dependent on sky reservoirs. You believe the right-wing lunatics that say Chinese leaders don't care what will happen. Glaciers on the Tibet-Qinghai Plateau that feed both the Yellow and Yangtze rivers are melting at 7% a year. The Yellow River, whose basin is home to 147 million people, could experience a large dry season flow reduction. The basin's 369 million people rely heavily on rice from fields irrigated with Yangtze River water. 2/3 of China's glaciers could be gone by 2060, leading to an ecological catastrophe. Your Western carbon use is doing this, not this. Africa's sky reservoirs decimated already. Tanzania's snow-capped Kilimanjaro may soon be snow and ice free. It lost 33% of its ice field between 1989 and 2000, thanks largely to you. Its snow cap could disappear entirely by 2015. This was feeding whole populations. Mount Kenya has lost 7 of its 18 glaciers. Wow, you're fast. Who would have guessed? This is generating conflict, wars, among the 2 million people who depend on them for water supplies during the dry season. This can't be. You say peace all the time, right? South American sky reservoirs decimated too, but unless you live there, 80% of the South American glaciers may disappear within the next 15 years. For countries like Bolivia, Ecuador, and Peru, which rely on glaciers for water for household and irrigation use, well, you know. Peruvians screwed by US, big time, over and over. Peru stretches some 1,600 kilometers along the vast Andean mountain range, and which is home to 70% of the Earth's tropical glaciers. It is in trouble, thanks to you. 22% of its glacial endowment has disappeared. Guess why? The Quilquea Glacier in southern Peru, which was retreating by 6 meters per year in the 1960s, is now retreating by 60 meters per year. Peru's farmers irrigate their wheat and potatoes with the river water from these disappearing glaciers. Bye bye. For Peru's 28 million people, shrinking glaciers will eventually mean a shrinking food supply. Lima, a city of 7 million people, gets most of its water from 3 rivers high in the Andes. Well, they got their water from there. But I'm sure they have lots of other options. I mean, you do, right? Southwestern United States screwed by US. The Colorado River, the region's primary source of irrigation water, depends on snowfields in the Rockies for much of its flow. California depends heavily on the Colorado, and also relies on snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada in the eastern part of the state. Both the Sierra Nevada and the coastal range supply irrigation water to California's Central Valley, the world's fruit and vegetable basket. With a business-as-usual energy policy, global climate models project a 70% reduction in the amount of snowpack for the western United States by mid-century. Wow, thank God for denial. You'll be fine. Central Asian countries screwed by US. Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan depend heavily on snowmelt from the Hindu Kush, Pamir, and Tian Shan mountain ranges for irrigation water. Nearby Iran gets much of its water from the snowmelt in the 5,700 meter high Elborz Mountains. Too bad for them we aren't terrorists, because our Western denial is infinitely more deadly than all the terrorism combined. Infinitely. Coal, oil melt ice and drown billions. The melting of the Earth's 2 massive ice sheets, Antarctica and Greenland, could raise sea level enormously. If the Greenland ice sheet were to melt, it would raise sea level 7 meters, 23 feet. Melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet would raise sea level 5 meters, 16 feet. IPCC projections of sea level rise during this century of 0.6 to 2 feet are already obsolete, and that a rise of 6 feet or more during this time is within range. Coal, oil fry the poles twice as fast. Alaska, western Canada, and eastern Russia, winter temperatures have already climbed by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, 4 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit, over the last half century. Some of the most rapid and severe climate change on Earth you've unleashed there. Retreat of the sea ice has devastating consequences for polar bears, some turning to cannibalism. Village after village is being destroyed. But they are poor, so it is okay. No money to fight it, or you. Luckily, your kids didn't need that huge reflective ice sheet for cooling. Oops. Climate scientists are most always dead wrong. Way too rose-colored glasses. True. In 1979 to 2006 the summer sea ice shrinkage accelerated to 9.1% a decade. Then, in 2007, Arctic sea ice shrank some 20% below the previous record, set in 2005. Sea could be ice-free well before 2050. Shrinking Arctic sea ice may have reached a tipping point that could trigger a cascade of climate change reaching into Earth's temperate regions. Yeah, think? Even the winter ice cover in the Arctic Ocean, shrank by 6% in 2005, and again in 2006, and the ice is not recovering after its melt season. Some scientists now think that the Arctic Ocean could be ice-free in the summer as early as 2030. Google, albedo effect. Galactic carbon reservoirs are on the verge of being ruptured by US. In the Arctic, we've been protected by the albedo effect. When incoming sunlight strikes the ice in the Arctic Ocean, up to 70% of it is reflected back into space, keeping Earth from warming. As the Arctic sea ice melts, however, and the incoming sunlight hits the much darker open water, only 6% is reflected back into space and 94% is converted into heat. This is of particular concern, because Greenland lies largely within the Arctic Circle, holding water that would otherwise raise seas 23 feet. Greenland's ice sheet, up to 1.6 kilometers, 1 mile, thick in places, is beginning to melt, very, very fast. Any guesses why? Turns out that coal and oil can lubricate glaciers too. Too bad sea level cities. As the surface ice begins to melt, some of the water filters down through cracks in the glacier, lubricating the surface between the glacier and the rock beneath it. Relatively warm water flowing through the glacier also carries surface heat deep inside the ice sheet. Yes, sheet. Greenland is melting at a hell of a pace. The rate of ice melt on that vast island has tripled over the last several years. Tripled. A University of Colorado team published a study in Nature indicating that between April 2004 and April 2006 Greenland lost ice at a rate 2.5 times that of the preceding 2 years. 250%. In October 2006, a team of NASA scientists reported that the flow of glaciers into the sea was accelerating. Eric Rignett, a glaciologist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, said, "None of this has been predicted by numerical models, and therefore all projections of the contribution of Greenland to sea level rise are way below reality, but hey, who are you going to believe, NASA, or the deniers? It is unclear, right?" Largely, your coal and oil are decimating the West Antarctica reservoir too. Antarctica is twice the size of Australia. The ice is about 2 kilometers thick. Antarctica contains 70% of the world's fresh water. 70%. Widespread snowmelt now is happening on the interior of the Antarctic ice sheet over an area the size of California. Melting in 2005 was as far as 900 kilometers inland. Antarctica had shown little to no warming in the recent past with the exception of the Antarctic Peninsula, but now large regions are showing the first signs of the impacts of warming. More Antarctic news, not good. Larsen A, a huge ice shelf on the east coast of the Antarctic Peninsula, broke up in 1995. In 2000, a huge iceberg nearly the size of Connecticut, 11,000 square kilometers, or 4,250 square miles, broke off the Ross Ice Shelf. In 2002 a huge chunk of ice broke off the Thwaites Glacier. Covering 5,500 square kilometers, this iceberg was the size of Rhode Island. The speed of the melting and breakup is staggering. Average temperature has risen 2.5 degrees Celsius over the last 5 decades there. Your Aflaholic coal, oil binge will drown 634 million people. If you analyze the effect of a 10-meter rise in sea level. 634 million people live along coasts at or below 10 meters above sea level, in what they call the low elevation coastal zone, 1/8 of the world's urban population. So, likely climate refugees include China, with 144 million, India and Bangladesh are next, with 63 and 62 million respectively. Vietnam has 43 million. US killing there continues. Indonesia, 42 million. Japan with 30 million, Egypt with 26 million, and the United States with 23 million. We Westerners cause the sea rise, but Easterners are the ones getting screwed. How cool is that? And we're using our might, from the oil and coal, to refuse to pay our share. OMG. I can't think why folks hate US. Your coal, oil binges unleashing 30-foot higher seas on others. Some of the world's largest cities, such as Shanghai, Kolkata, London, and New York, will be partly or entirely inundated. Vast areas of productive farmland will also be lost. The rice-growing river deltas and floodplains of Asia would be covered with salt water. Too bad. You're all going to be crushed by US. Your government's too weak to withstand the political and economic stress of relocating large numbers of people while suffering losses of housing and industrial facilities. Displaced people will want to move to other countries. Will this pressure for migration cause more and more states fail? Now take your time with this tough question. Killer storms? You ain't seen nothing. Remember Star Trek Voyage Home movie? Higher surface water temperatures in the tropical oceans mean more energy and moisture radiating into the atmosphere to drive tropical storm systems, leading to more destructive storms. Combination of rising seas, more powerful storms, and stronger storm surges are devastating. Killer Katrina, your coal, oil binge making her a regular visitor. In some Gulf Coast towns, Katrina's powerful 28-foot high storm surge did not leave a single structure standing. A year after the storm had passed, the most damaged areas of the city remained without water, power, sewage disposal, garbage collection, or telecommunications. 290,000 have not yet returned home, and will likely never do so. These storm evacuees are the Western world's first large wave of climate refugees, though dwarfed by China's 125 billion from our desertification. Katrina was the most financially destructive hurricane ever to make landfall anywhere. Insurance premiums have doubled, tripled, and even in some especially vulnerable situations gone up tenfold, lowering coastal real estate values and driving people and businesses out of highly exposed states like Florida. Your coal, oil habit is making those like you 1998 Mitch a frequent visitor as well. Winds approaching 200 miles per hour. He had 2 meters of rain were dumped on parts of Honduras and Nicaragua. The deluge collapsed a country full of homes, factories, and schools, leaving them in ruins. Mitch destroyed roads and bridges. 70% of the crops and much of the topsoil in Honduras were washed away. Yes, the US is powerful. Huge mudslides destroyed villages, burying local populations. The storm left 11,000 dead. Overall, what the US binge on coal and oil destroyed over several days took us 50 years to build, said their president. – 2004 served the world a taste of the coal, oil hangover you're leaving your kids. Japan experienced a record 10 typhoons, hurricanes, that collectively caused $10 billion worth of losses. Florida was hit by 4 of the 10 most costly hurricanes in US history. These 4 hurricanes together generated insurance claims of $22 billion. Your coal, oil afloholism is flooding home Earth. The number of major flood disasters worldwide has grown over the last several decades, increasing from 6 major floods in the 1950s to 26 in the 1990s. Insurers are convinced that with higher temperatures and more energy and moisture driving storm systems, future losses will be even greater. They are concerned about whether the industry can remain solvent under this onslaught of growing damages. Oh, your kids will be so surprised. Coal, oil killer weather. 58 insured losses of $1 billion or more since 1983. 55 were weather-related storms, floods, hurricanes, or wildfires. In the 1980s, there were 3 such events. In the 1990s, there were 26, and between 2000 and 2006 alone there were 26. Coal, oil serving up deadly Western Europe winter storms. Traditionally, Europe is used to experiencing a heavily damaging winter storm perhaps once in a century. The first winter storm, to exceed $1 billion, occurred in 1987. Since then, Western Europe has had nine major winter storms with insured losses ranging from $1.3 billion to $5.9 billion. Global warming means climate change, climate extremes. Coal, oil climate Armageddon decimating all kids' global financial future. Damage from atmospherically related events has increased by roughly 10% a year. If such an increase were to continue indefinitely, by 2065 storm damage would exceed the gross world product. The world obviously would face bankruptcy long before then. Relax. Such predictions are always wrong. Oops. Yes, they've all been way too conservative. Hurry, take them back. Quote denial. Your coal, oil addiction is crushing 20-30% of all future global world product, GWP. Or, it is projected that the long-term costs of climate change could exceed 20-30% of gross world product, GWP. The near-term costs of cutting greenhouse gas emissions to stabilize climate, which Stern estimates at 1% of GWP, would be a bargain. But, never mind. You've more important things to attend to. Just months remain to launch the cutting of carbon 80% by 2020. Then, it's over. 2/3 of the glaciers that feed the Yellow and Yangtze rivers of China will disappear by 2060, if even the current 7% annual rate of melting continues. The Gangotri Glacier, which supplies 70% of the ice melt that feeds the Ganges River during the dry season, could disappear entirely in a matter of decades. Loss of water during the dry season will lead not just to hunger, but to starvation on an unimaginable scale. Asian food security would take a second hit, because its rice-growing river deltas and floodplains would be underwater from Greenland and West Antarctic melt. Coal, oil already have delivered a million years worth of warming. Sea level rise of only 1 meter would inundate half of the rice land in Bangladesh. This is starting to happen right now with the current temperature. "2007 reports from Greenland are way beyond nightmare. Glaciers' suicide into the sea had accelerated beyond anything glaciologists had thought possible. Huge chunks of ice weighing several billion tons each were breaking off and sliding into the sea, causing minor earthquakes as they did so. With meltwater lubricating the surface between the glaciers and the rocks on which they rested, ice flows were accelerating, flowing into the ocean at a pace of 2 meters an hour. This accelerated flow, along with the earthquakes, shows the potential for the entire ice sheet to break up and collapse. Scientists who once thought that the Arctic Ocean could be free of ice during the summer by 2100 now see it occurring by 2030, 70 years earlier. Even this could turn out to be a conservative estimate. This is of particular concern to scientists because of the albedo effect, where the replacement of highly reflective sea ice with darker open water greatly increases heat absorbed from sunlight. This, of course, has the potential to further accelerate the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. A second feedback loop of concern is the melting of permafrost. This would release billions of tons of carbon, some as methane, a potent greenhouse gas with a global warming effect per ton 25 times that of carbon dioxide. Methane in permafrost is estimated at 1.6 trillion tons. Methane release caused the last killer warming on Earth. 0.5 trillion tons of CO2 in atmosphere is causing the 1 degree F temperature rise so far. 1.6 trillion tons methane is 3 times our CO2 so far, but it is 25 times more warming, which means Arctic methane will do about 75 times the damage if you let it melt. Will you? Oops, sorry. You've probably got something to watch on TV now. 2007 reports. The certainty facing humanity is that climate change could spiral out of control, and it will no longer be possible to arrest trends such as ice melting and rising sea level. At this point, the future of civilization would be hellacious. This combination of melting glaciers, rising seas, and their effects on food security and low-lying coastal cities could overwhelm the capacity of world governments to cope. The changes just described could overwhelm even the strongest of states. 2007 reports from Greenland are way beyond nightmare. If you awaken now, Plan B will prevent atmospheric CO2 concentration from exceeding 400 ppm if you cause its launch. Plan B includes phasing out all coal-fired power plants by 2020 while greatly reducing the use of oil. Making this shift using currently available technologies. The three components of this carbon-cutting effort are halting deforestation while planting trees to sequester carbon. See Chapter 8, Raising Energy Efficiency Worldwide. See Chapter 11, and Harnessing the Earth's Renewable Sources of Energy. See Chapter 12, including a massive shift to plug-in hybrid cars, running them largely on wind-generated electricity, and using them as storage batteries for wind for the grid. Yes, it is perfectly doable. Plan B includes a wholesale restructuring of the world energy economy with a wartime sense of urgency, much as the US restructured its industrial economy in a matter of months at the beginning of World War II. See Chapter 13. The stakes in World War II were high, but they are far higher today. What is at issue now is whether we can mobilize fast enough to save our global civilization. If you awaken now, Plan B will prevent atmospheric CO2 concentration from exceeding 400 ppm if you cause its launch.